Right, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for sticking with us. It's been a fascinating day, all set up, obviously, by the BBC in its intimate wisdom, and I think we've covered that pretty fully. So it's nice to be not saying anything as far as I know about the BBC in this session, though I'm sure somebody might find a reason to do so. We're going to be talking about the bid, the implications of the Sky Comcast bid for ITV. Just to remind you what's happened, ITV has confirmed that it's in preliminary discussions regarding a possible sale of its media and entertainment business to Sky for a value of about £1.6 billion. This would include the broadcast channels and the ITVX online service, but not the ITV Studios production business. Sky is owned by the American communications company Comcast, which also owns NBC, Universal and the Peacock online service, and it's got revenues of about £123 billion. The discussions are at an early stage, would require regulatory approval, and it comes after ITV reported it expected advertising revenue to be down 6% over the year. And we've got a wonderful panel here to talk about that. So we've got Gill, Hind, who is the managing director and director of TV at Enders Analysis. You were at Freeview. You've been working in this field for 20 years, and Capital.
Since I was a child.
Since you were a child. Yeah, excellent. Catherine, next to me, is the Professor of Media and Communications at the University of Leeds. She's also a VLV trustee, and again, she's steeped in all this work in its entirety. And we've got Kat Lewis, who's the CEO, Joint Creative Director and Executive Producer of Nine Lives Media, which is a production company. It mainly works for BBC. It does most of the more panoramas than anybody else, but it does also work for ITV. So that is our panel. Gill is going to set us up with an introduction about what's going on and some of the issues, and then we're going to bat it amongst ourselves, and then we're going to open it up to you. So Gill, Hind, over to you.
Thanks very much, Torin. So firstly, just to note, and Torin's already mentioned this, these are just preliminary discussions. They might lead nowhere. There's a lot of regulatory hurdles, so we're really looking at 2027 if this were to be approved. So there's been a lot of rumour about companies acquiring ITV Studios, the global production arm, and so therefore splitting up ITV. However, these have come to nothing, and instead the offers come in for its media and entertainment division, which is basically its broadcast channels and its streaming operations. So why is Sky considering this? Well, we need to take a step back and consider the wider TV market, not just here, but globally. Television audiences are in decline, and even though that rate of decline is gently slowing, it is still in decline. So what are people watching? Well, we've got the SVOD services, such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney, etc., and alongside that, also video sharing platforms such as YouTube, as well as social media, such as Facebook. And these are all competing for eyes and time with television. In fact, YouTube is increasingly being watched on the TV. Last year, 20% of under 34's viewing on the TV set was to YouTube, and only about 40% to broadcasters' content. So you can see there's a big difference. Now, in reality, the next few years, there's likely to be 1, 2, or maybe 2.5 local players in each market, and they're going to compete with 2 or 3 streaming giants. That's going to be Netflix, it's going to be YouTube, and it's going to be sort of one other, maybe Amazon, maybe Disney. So how do you make sure that you're one of those players? So clearly in the UK, we're going to have the BBC. ITV is the largest commercial broadcaster, and Sky the largest pay TV player. Now, Sky needs more scale to ensure it can play in the same ballparks as, say, Netflix. Now, ITV and PSBs in general, they're having a hard time. We've got declining audiences, declining revenues, and considerably more competition. Now, all broadcasters have to transition to digital, but that takes huge investment in tech, and ITV would find that very difficult to do that just by themselves. So you put the two together, and you immediately have scale. ITV can use the tech capabilities of Sky and its parent Comcast to develop its streaming proposition. But even the two of them combined, they're slightly smaller than BBC, but only just slightly larger than YouTube. So think about that. And as viewing moves away from the linear schedule and through discrete apps or through smart TVs, where the TV platform owner, they're the gatekeeper. So greater scale means greater negotiation power. and also with a greater amount of content, the ability to increase viewer engagement and therefore revenues. So a combined company would have a mix of pay and free, different content brands, so together they'll be able to have greater flexibility around distribution, windowing and monetization of content. So it'll be better able to keep viewers within its own ecosystem, whether that's through a Sky brand or an ITV brand. But there are regulatory hurdles. There's basically 3 that they have to clear, 2 of which are probably not that problematic. Now, firstly, ITV, we all know, is a public service broadcaster, and with that comes a fair amount of obligations. For ITV, most of these are around regionality and news programming. Now, the Secretary of State, Lisa Nandy, and Ofcom must be convinced that Sky would honour those PSB commitments to the end of the ITV's licence, which is the end of 2034. Now, on this, it'd be pretty easy to get approval. Sky wouldn't be entering any of these discussions if it wasn't serious to committing to those obligations. Now, ITV is made up of lots of regional licences, and that's part of its incredible strength. It appeals to, reflects the communities it serves. Now, Sky doesn't have any regional quotas, but it still invests in production all around the UK. Now, broadcasters do recognise the value that this brings, both on-screen and off-screen. And Sky really values local and UK-specific content. It's what the viewers want more than anything else. And in terms of its news commitments, again, Sky's really supportive of a strong news sector. It's obviously got Sky News, very strong journalist integrity, and great sort of almost public service broadcasting. So I think Sky can demonstrate the commitment to ITV's PSB obligations. The next hurdle is plurality of news. Now, this is going to be an issue that will be looked at closely. ITV controls 40% of ITN, the remaining 60% between DMGT, Thomson Reuters and Informer equally. Now, ITN provides the news not only for ITV, but also for Channel 4 and for Channel 5. ITV's current deal with ITN expires in 2030. And then you look at Comcast. Now, Comcast has got a commitment to fund Sky News until the end of 2028, after which there is currently uncertainty. That being said, Sky's management has always firmly believed in the benefits of strong independent news, and given their understanding of the importance of plurality, would assume that this would be firmly and satisfactorily addressed in any ITV deal. So the harder regulatory issue is going to be that of advertising and the combined group's share of advertising expenditure. Now, the CMA has always considered the relevant market to be just TV advertising, and so that if you were to take that market, then ITV and Sky combined, the 2 sales houses, would have about a 70% market share. However, broadcasters would argue this definition is now far too narrow, given that they increasingly compete for audiences against SVODs, connected TV platforms, YouTube, and all other online video. Now, those SVOD services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney, they're all actually measured by BARB, so we'd imagine that the CMA is going to say that is part of the TV market now. But the other side of that is those big tech companies, which between them can control about 55% of the UK's total advertising. Now, if we were to narrow that down and just look at their video advertising, then actually the ITV Sky combined share would go down from about 70 to just 30%, because the others are so large in that, and their share is growing magnificently, whereas total TV revenue is in slight decline. So the big issue that they're going to have is whether they can argue that to the CMA that the market is much wider than just television, which I think hopefully should be able to prove this time.
Thank you very much, Gill. That's really set us up very, very well. Catherine, what's your take on all of this?
So, thanks so much for Gill doing all the technical and difficult stuff. I thought I'd talk a little bit about what this might mean from a sort of public service broadcasting position. I think it's really important to start from the position of where ITV is now as a public service broadcaster. Back in 20 years ago, I did the first academic book on the history of ITV and looked at that stage about how its remit had declined over the 50 years. Where we are now is that ITV has a remit that's very, very different from the remit that it was originally set up with, which was pretty much mirroring the BBC's. It's primarily focused on news, UK-originated content and some regional content. These are important, but they're a far cry from what they were. So I think it's really important to set that out right at the very beginning. Gill set out some of the issues in relation to the public service remit and the public service licence, and I agree with her. I think it's hard to imagine this takeover being allowed without some kind of requirement that the ITV public service licence continues till 2034. There's a question then about what happens after 2034. Sky could choose to continue with ITV as a public service broadcaster, or it could choose not to. There's a public service compact about what you get in return for being a public service broadcaster, and ITV have actually been arguing for a while that that compact needs to be addressed, and that they need to get more for the obligations that they have. But we need to bear in mind that even if there isn't a takeover, ITV could still choose after 2034 to stop fulfilling those remits, to say we don't want to be a public service broadcaster anymore. It's not worth it for us. In relation to news, I would agree with Gill around the sort of diversity of the news provision being an issue. Will we see a situation where Sky might choose to stop delivering the Sky brand, maybe merge that into what they're doing with ITV, and then we have less plurality in news, and then that would have, I think, serious consequences for audiences and for democracy. But then on the other side of that, I think we also need to be aware of what's happening to the wider news market. So Ofcom's most recent Media Nations report showed that online news consumption is now on a par with TV news consumption. So when we're thinking about this sort of more widely in terms of the diversity of our news provision, I think we need to look across the piece and not just at the TV space. And then I think there's probably a more abstract question around selling off our national media to US companies and the undue influence of the US in our media market. And one of the reasons why ITV was set up as a public service broadcaster 70 years ago, one of the big debates around it was protecting the UK market from undue American influence and ensuring that we had like a robust UK media that was different from what you see in the US. And I think that argument is as important, if not more important, with the undue and growing influence of US platforms as a sort of running the sort of ecosystem of our media system. However, Paramount purchased Channel 5 a few years ago, and that's generally been really positive for the channel and for audiences. They've demonstrated a really strong commitment to public service values. Most recently, they've commissioned Play for Today, which is really showing that they're interested in doing innovative things. And so I think that with the right regulation, that it's not, there may be ways of sort of mitigating some of those concerns around US ownership. So I think that's something that needs to be concerned. The last thing I'm going to say is just a sort of more broader philosophical question, which is around consolidation. So the argument for the takeover of ITV is that ITV needs to be larger, that our British broadcasters need to be larger in order to be able to compete, that consolidation is required for survival. And I think this opens up sort of wider questions around what it means for the broader market, and in particular for Channel 4. If that is the case, then is there a future for Channel 4? And then if that is the case, do we need to be thinking in different ways about how we are approaching public service broadcasting regulation? And I've said this before, we often focus on regulating the broadcasters that are already regulated, but public service media as a system, it's a systemic intervention into regulatory markets to create a media system that operates in the public interest. And I think we're at a pinch moment here where there are two choices. We can go, the market's too difficult, we'll deregulate, so we'll allow consolidation, we will allow the reduction of remits, or we say we need to look at the wider ecosystem. Can we be doing more to regulate that ecosystem to better enable companies like ITV, whether taken over or not, to be able to thrive and continue to fulfill this public service remit that we want them to achieve? So that's a big question for us to end on.
Thank you very much. That's covered off and a lot of other issues as well. Kat, how does it look from your point of view as an independent producer?
Well, all of us now are having to compete globally. The broadcasters are, us as producers are, so our ideas have to be able to attract audiences from all over the world. They have to sell all over the world. And it is becoming increasingly difficult because obviously in America, the cable channels who used to love buying our programs, they don't exist anymore, really. There's been huge consolidation in America. And I think the risk that we have here, I think Catherine's absolutely right. And again, thank you for setting everything out, Gill. But we are at this pinch point now. So do we as a country, because we're very clever with television, we always have been, do we take the next step forward so that we reinvent PSB for this digital global age? Do we become part of that? And do we allow ITV, and I think we can all be incredibly proud of ITV. It's been such a wonderful channel, and for somebody like myself with an office in Birmingham, an office in Media City, you know, it's the one broadcaster that's always looked outside London. In fact, it was Granada programme makers that really created the current iteration of ITV, and it is a globally successful company. ITVX is brilliant. You know, they're already doing deals with Disney Plus, for example, and they have to in the current marketplace in order to have a chance of competing against the likes of YouTube, Amazon, Apple. You know, those tech giants have got incredibly deep pockets. So it could be really good news. It could mean that ITV have got a lot more money to invest in programmes, invest in drama, invest in factual content, which is what we make. Comcast is absolutely huge. You know, they own DreamWorks, they own Universal, they own NBC. Obviously, they've got Sky here and across Europe. In terms of news, I think, again, it could be very positive. There's always been this PSB requirement for ITV to make programmes across the country in the various different regions. And it is a difficult thing at the moment for them to, certainly I know in Scotland there have been difficulties for them to meet that remit. You know, it does require money in order to compete. Suddenly they'd be part of a global news company. You know, NBC, they'd have immediately bureaus kind of all over the world, as well as what they do very well in this country. And I think with the right regulation, you know, this could all work very well, and it could mean that public service television is suddenly fit for a digital global marketplace.
So it doesn't reduce the number of outlets you have to sell your programmes to, it could actually help that?
I think it could help it in terms of future-proofing ITV. I genuinely believe that. We've talked about Channel 5. That deal with Paramount has been brilliant. You know, Channel 5 are a very important client to independent producers in this country as well. Channel 4 obviously is suffering. It's in a difficult place. The advertising revenue from traditional television programmes is going down. Anybody can look at the overnights and see that there's a crisis, you know. So that advertising that we talked about, that Gill outlined in terms of ITV suddenly being part of, you know, a very large group, that means, quite frankly, they can compete in the future against the likes of, you know, Facebook, Meta, Apple. You know, suddenly they're able to kind of, you know, future-proof their advertising revenue in a way that currently they can't.
Has PACT, the Producers Alliance that I know you are part of, have they discussed this? Might they have a view on this?
PACT, as I understand it, because I did talk to them yesterday, I'm no longer part of the council, but they're going to discuss it at their next meeting, you know, which is kind of, I think, in a couple of weeks' time, and they will have a view, and obviously they've always got very clever people, you know, running big production companies as part of their committees and council, so I'm sure that their view will be, you know, really important.
Gill, one of your colleagues pointed out that actually people have been talking far more about ITV studios as a nice thing to buy, and why Comcast looking at the rest of the business rather than ITV studios, and how would this work if ITV studios was separated from ITV?
Two different questions there. So on the first one, in terms of why they're looking at the channels business, basically, I mean, actually, if you look at the valuation of it, it's 1.6 billion was the sort of agreed figure. Now, ITV, these channels business last year turned over 2.1 in revenue, so just about sort of 1.8 million in advertising revenue. So actually, if you look at those multiples, it's basically the same. It's just under 1 times the revenue they earned, and you could argue that actually the ITV channels business has been massively undervalued in the last few years, because you've almost sort of already taken that hit all traditional broadcasters have already taken that hit, not just in the UK, but sort of across Europe and globally, because everyone's viewing their businesses as in severe decline. So their sort of market cap has gone down. And actually, you know, this ties in with your second question, actually, about studios and how will it be affected. About 60% of viewing hours to ITV is to programming made by ITV studios. They're sort of inextricably linked. And actually, when there is this separation, if it does happen, there will clearly have to be programme supply agreements. Because if you think about that, that's really beneficial for both the studios, whether it's Granada or whether it's one of the external ones they've acquired, and also for the channels themselves. So actually, the two are closely linked, and that needs to continue.
So who would actually own ITV studios at that point?
I'm assuming they'll be split off into a separate company.
A separate company,
Yeah.
which would be recreated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Catherine, is that your, understanding?
I
of
would have
what-
thought so, or possibly bought by someone else.
Well, that's the
Yeah.
other thing. So then you have another battle. You raised Channel 4. Where are we with Channel 4 in terms of if this happened, that would weaken Channel 4 more, do you think?
I don't say that if, well, yes, possibly, but I think the Channel 4's position is weak anyway, I suppose is the question. And then if we are saying that for ITV to be able to survive moving forward, it needs to be bought, then what does Channel 4 need in order to be able to survive moving forward is the question. Yeah.
Now, as Gill pointed out, and Catherine, it's actually the advertisers and ad agencies who will have something more to say about this, because they are the ones who will get squeezed. For example, Paul Bainfair, who runs the IPA, the Advertising Agencies Association. What hasn't changed, and we know this from our work measuring effectiveness, is how important advertising on ITV is compared to the streamers or the internet platforms. For example, the coverage of the new John Lewis Christmas ad, it would be seen by most people more quickly on ITV than any other channel. If a takeover reduced that specialness, that would be a concern. Matthew Horsman, who many of you know as an analyst, says the issue is whether a combination of Sky and ITV is an acceptable increase in market share and power. And if the market is all video, then Sky and ITV together don't look like a problem, as Gill said. But if the broadcast TV market is still the relevant measure, then the combination looks unfair. And then Sir Peter Bazalgette, who was the chief executive of ITV and many other things, he is very much in favour of this move. He says, I want to see public service broadcasting survive and continue to deliver programming for us, by us. And he says, we've reached the point where the cost of obligations, like commissioning a certain amount of programming from independent producers and delivering regional news, is more expensive than the cost of the licence. Things will have to change. Now, Michael Grade was the first ITV chief executive or executive chairman to suggest, actually, we may not want to have a PSB licence. We may not want to do news. So if all these things are in the mix, it could be very, very significant. But the only other point I would make is how far can you actually trust the competition authorities? Many of us remember Project Kangaroo, which would have put the British market way ahead of the game in terms of bringing together all of our players before Netflix, before everybody came along, and that was stopped by the Competitions and Markets authorities. So do we trust the regulators to make the right decision?
It's a bit of a leading question. They're not always known for looking forwards, are they? But if you just look at sort of the online video advertising revenue, I think I think in the last sort of since pre-COVID, if you take that 2019 as a base of like 100, the TV market is actually below 100 now. If you look at YouTube, it's about on an index on about 250, and then if you look at all the other online ones, they're on about 400. So their growth is huge. And every year, so when the CMA will be looking at this, say the end of next year, the TV market share will have gone down again. So the question is, can they be forward-looking on this? If you were to ask many advertisers, which always happens in these competition things, and the agencies, then actually, if you're looking at agencies now, they don't have a TV buying place. They will have something that's looking at the whole of video. So they'll be buying YouTube in the same campaign as they're buying ITV, or they're buying Sky, or they're buying Netflix. So the agencies themselves have this thing as the whole total video. Within that, if we're just, obviously if you're saying, and I appreciate your comment there, that ITV still has those huge audiences. They're going down quite significantly in terms of 10 million, 5 million. There aren't many of those now, but they still have those huge audiences. So the first question the CMA has to answer is, what is the size of that market? And if the size of the market, and I think they rightly should look at it in a wider than just television, they then within that can say, actually, does ITV, just ITV and Sky together within that TV bit, do they have an advantage? And that's something they'll be looking at.
Yeah. Catherine?
I mean, I would broadly agree that there is a need to look beyond just a sort of narrowly defined TV market, but I think that needs to happen not just for the CMA in relation to this particularly, but in terms of our regulation more broadly. And I think at the moment we have quite heavily regulated broadcast sector that is increasingly not a broadcasting sector anymore. I mean, broadcasting is on its way out. And so we need, in terms of regulation more generally, to be thinking more ambitiously and more broadly across the piece. So we were talking about podcast regulation on the last panel, and is podcasting, broadcasting, suddenly these things are blurring. It's video, it's audiovisual content. YouTube is now watched on televisions. We need a much more coherent regulatory framework for the audiovisual market, and that includes the CMA.
Absolutely.
But what you could do is ensure that there is a full public interest test for this particular situation, so that, obviously we've said that if Comcast is allowed to buy ITV, they would also be buying the public service requirement until 2034, which is important to note. But, there could be a full kind of examination by Ofcom to make sure that it does meet all the public interest requirements.
I'm going to open it up to the floor shortly, so just have your question. Finally, Stuart Purvis mentioned that the government is about to do something in terms of regulation, changing quite a lot of the way the industry is looked at, regulated, BBC and so on. What are you expecting, and do we know when that might happen? I know things get delayed in government quite a lot. So where are we with what the government is talking about at the moment?
Is this the charter renewal, or is this just
He was saying it was more widespread.
So I think,
than
well, there's two big things, I guess. So there's BBC Charter Review, which will come out before or after Christmas. Anyone know? I mean, it was just, we thought we were expecting it by now, but I think just before Christmas, I think, is the general feeling at the moment. A nice Christmas present. And then there is a larger set of work that Gill and I have both been involved with, where the DCMS is looking at the future of TV distribution, which is about the future of broadcast infrastructure in the UK, which will come out sometime next year. There'll be some proposals on that sometime next year. So I imagine that those are the two big things, I guess, in this.
Yeah,
in this
and the Media Act still hasn't.
And
a
the
lot
Media
of
Act
that
still,
hasn't been implemented, and one of those big areas is is the future of prominence.
Yeah.
And the PSBs will say it's not going far enough, and then other people might say it's going too far. But if you consider that in, say, 10 years' time, and you think, we're talking about the ITV's obligations, and obviously it got free analogue spectrum, and there were only like a couple of channels when it first started, or 3 channels were there, then Channel 4, then Channel 5. Now there are probably about 400 channels that I can watch on my Samsung TV, and they've just got this tiny bit of prominence on what is the broadcast bit. That all really needs to be reviewed, because it is not enough. It's not sufficient for public service media today.
And I'll just give a shout out, actually, that Ofcom earlier this week have set out a consultation on broadcasting regulation. So if you care about this, respond. The deadline's quite soon. I think it's end of January. So there's a current consultation.
What are they proposing? Very simply, it may not be possible to simplify it.
Vicky,
No, don't worry.
Ofcom.
Thank you. It's been a great conference.
We'll get to a microphone. Have a microphone. There you go. Yeah.
Basically, it follows on from our public service media review, which we published early summer, so end of July. So one of the recommendations in that, we said we would look and review at regulation, as the panel has said. We work in a framework which is cited very much in a linear world, and obviously we are living very much in a digital world. So it's inviting, and we're having a lot of meetings with stakeholders right across the UK in terms of regulation that is perhaps outdated, that needs updating, that needs jettisoning completely, and also that any regulation that might inhibit any sort of innovation or initiatives to retain a successful and sustainable PSM market.
And that's
January the 29th.
And that's all on your website, presumably?
It is.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And just to say, the Media Act hasn't been implemented. What does that mean? Sorry.
Some parts of it have been implemented, and Vicky can probably give the lowdown on that, but there's a lot of consultation that has to go through in terms of how you actually do some of this. And so things like prominence, we're still in the middle of that, and I believe in terms of what TV platforms should be liable to that, and actually what it all means, and what does prominence, how does it manifest itself when it's more than just a channel on an EPG. So that's ongoing and should be implemented fully, I think, next year.
Yeah, I mean, that is a massive undertaking, as you can imagine, for Ofcom, our PSM review, as I said earlier this year. That was, if you like, part 2 of that original Media Act recommendation, which came out of Small Screen Big Debate 5 years ago. So the Media Act takes us so far. A lot of consultations been out this year. They will be implemented next year. Obviously, there'll be a huge amount, again, of stakeholder engagement and bedding in with those new roles. But, yeah, the Media Act takes us so far, but clearly there's further to go.
So now you know why Ofcom hasn't been concentrating on the BBC. Question here about ITV. If you hold your hand up. No, at the end of the row. No, at the back. Right at the back.
Hi, I'm an ITV shareholder, and at the end of the day, it will be us that decide whether or not this happens or not. However, going back to Kangaroo and setting up a BritBox, etc., the ITV then spent lots of money a few years ago setting up ITVX. I've never been able to find out at the AGMs at ITV why they bothered and why they didn't just use BritBox platform rather than the ITVX platform. However, my question is, where am I going to be left? Yet again, another British company that perhaps is going to leave the London Stock Exchange. And this is today, the budget. £8,000 of people who are under 65 are being encouraged to buy British stock. Why, when in a couple of years' time it will be bought by an American company? Where does that leave shareholders in the UK and the British companies that we have, including ITV?
Now, I know you can't talk on behalf of ITV, but who would like to tackle that one?
It's a bit of a rhetorical question, really.
I don't know what to say other than it would be nice if the Labour government had a stronger industrial strategy.
But also, you've just got to look at the comparative size of the marketplace. And, you know, America is a massive marketplace. This is a huge company, and that means it has extremely deep pockets. So if the deal does go through, then it could be incredibly positive in terms of, you know, future-proofing. They will have, and they also run broadband in America. You know, they're a digital company, essentially. They'll be able to kind of totally future-proof the likes of ITVX, which is actually already very successful and has been, and all the YouTube channels that ITV are setting up are as well.
The problem is for shareholders, if the share is taken out of London Stock Exchange, if the stock is taken out of London and it moves to New York, which it could well do, regulations that then apply to us in the UK, we have to fill in forms for tax for America. We have to move where we hold the shares, and it's actually not worthwhile because US companies do not pay dividends. You only gain on the capital value. So a shareholding in a stock shareholding in the US is not as good as one that sits on the FTSE.
So you'll be able to sell your shares and buy something else that's British?
Why? Because it'll be taken over by yet another American company in a couple of years' time. It keeps happening.
But also, the alternative could be that those shares just reduce in value year on year.
Thank you. Okay. Microphone to Phil Harding here on the end of the row. It's there. It's there.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Hi, Phil Harding. I'm a broadcaster and a journalist.
Can you hold it nearer your mouth,
I wonder.
Phil?
Yeah, sure. Is that better? I wonder how much of an issue plurality of voice in news provision will be in all of this. And I'm thinking in particular of the relationship between the Daily Mail Group and a Labour government. You've got the Daily Mail Group, as you reminded us, with a 20% holding in ITN. You've also got the Daily Mail Group now with a massive bid in for the Telegraph. And you've got the relationship between the Daily Mail Group and the Labour Party, which has to nod this through, of course, which is not, how shall we put it, of the best at all times. How is that going to play out?
What's that first?
Gill. Yeah, I mean, the Daily Mail and the Telegraph thing is going to play out, well, I think Lisa and Andy gave them 3 weeks from a couple of days ago in terms of they've got to actually, the Mail Group have to get their bid into the Telegraph. That's going to play out way before any of ITV / Sky. And I think that's going to be the crucial test, is what happens in the press market. I think actually the plurality with DMG holding 20% of ITN, I don't think really plays into much of this.
Could it have an influence the way that one goes as to how this one will be looked at?
I think they're a very different proposition. You've got the sort of the two huge newspapers, and this is just a shareholding in ITN. I don't really think you can read from one to the other.
I think it's more about kind of Sky News versus ITV, isn't it? You know, that you'll have Comcast owning both, basically, or owning 40% of ITN, which provides ITV News kind of here in London. There are still regional newsrooms, so that are they will be owned by Comcast itself. So I think, you know, there's a commitment to Sky News until 2028 only, and it has been losing a lot of money. So I think the whole thing needs to be kind of really thoroughly examined. But obviously it is important to retain independence and have as much plurality as is possible.
You mentioned the brand. Would they keep the two brands separate, or would...
I would imagine they'll keep the brands separate. Just saying, Sky News has never made money since it started, and Sky has always invested in Sky News because they see the sort of the greater good of having it.
Why would you keep the two brands if money was the issue and you needed to save money and save journalists and so on?
I mean, we don't sit around that table. We don't know if they will keep them.
Yeah.
ITV brand is huge, which is absolutely huge, and it will be sort of almost nonsensical to get rid of that. And then actually, if you think about it, what you'll have the pay channels of Sky and the free channels of ITV, and you can move them around from one to the other. Now, if they've got the same brand name or something very similar, it's sort of everyone then thinks, oh, it's the same company, whereas actually you can almost do that with separate brand names as keeping them slightly separate. And actually that probably helps you overall with your total audiences.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yes, question there.
Hi, thank you. That was a really interesting commentary. I just wonder whether, just to shift the subject a bit, we might have a PSB commitment to drama as part of this deal, because we talk endlessly about news, and I do actually think that's really important. But, you know, ITV, for most of us, those who watch television as opposed to study it, you know, for sort of work purposes, is about the pleasure of watching drama. Very often, and it does rather worry me that drama is then that we're going to end up with Netflix-influenced drama on this new ITV. And since I don't like Netflix-influenced drama, I would like to see a PSB extended a bit to have local, if the UK counts as being local, local drama supported in this merger.
Any thoughts about drama and PSB?
Drama.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's an interesting question, Christine, because one of the things that you could... we're talking about the compact, right, the PSB compact, and we've seen that the requirements on ITV have gone down over the years because of these commercial pressures. One of the things that that could be said around this takeover is, yes, we'll allow it, but we want you to do it a little bit more. So that is, you know, or we want to make our requirements around UK programming a little bit more robust. as opposed to just programmes made in the UK, which can be made in the UK, but like, as Netflix does, with an eye on the global market. That said, I mean, and you've said this, Kat, and you might have more to say about this, those pressures on making content they're just there anyway. And there was a great panel at VLV conference in the spring, which had the producers of Miss Bates versus the Post Office on it, just talking about the absolute challenge of being able to continue to make that kind of content in the current the pressures of the current global marketplace. But you might have more to say on that.
Well, one would hope that what would happen if it were to go through is that there could be easy co-production deals done between companies that Comcast owns, broadcasters rather that Comcast owns. So Peacock, for example, NBC, Universal, they could start to do deals kind of in a kind of easier way because they're part of the same company to fund more universal type drama in the way that Netflix does and compete against Netflix more easily. But hopefully it would also mean that there is money for Mr. Bates and the Post Office, and that's where the PSB regulation is being met, because those programmes are incredibly important.
Yeah, I think it's one other point to make on that is that the UK has a great pedigree for making drama that's not that's sold globally, as we all know. And in even Netflix, you might argue that it's all very sort of global stuff, but actually some of their biggest hits are UK hits that are very specific. So something like Toxic Town, for example, that should have been made by a PSB. It's a phenomenal programme. And when Netflix started making that, that's clearly a UK issue, a UK problem. So, I think actually if there's more money to make drama because you've got Sky backed by Comcast or stroke NBC on that one, then I think that's good for the UK.
And adolescence, of course.
And adolescence, yeah.
There is one important thing to say, though, which is people possibly don't know this, but if you make a drama for Netflix as a producer, Netflix own it. Amazon own it. The great thing about the PSBs from the producer's point of view, and I would argue that we have the best television system in the world because of this, is that we own all our programmes. So that means, I've been able to set up a YouTube channel with the hundreds of hours of programmes that my company owns, which is a brilliant situation to be in. And it means it's, we're able to kind of run companies with new revenue streams on that basis.
Carol, can we get a microphone to Carol? Yeah.
Thank you very much for absolutely fascinating discussion. I just want to ask Catherine, she used the words, don't we need to think as regards regulation much more ambitiously across the piece? We're in danger of falling way behind Australia, Canada, the whole of Europe in what we're making demands upon all the players present in our audiovisual market. So my question to Catherine is it not time to actually, as you said, look across the piece and be making demands that there's investment, a percentage of your revenues are invested in local content, and we define what that is, investment in local production, prominence of content. Children's Media Federation, in front of Select Committee, said that we have to be giving children, British programming for children, due prominence on YouTube and indeed on TikTok. Otherwise, our PSB values are simply going to be lost.
Yeah, I would really agree with you, Carol, and I was very pleased that in Transmission Critical, the Ofcom's forward-looking review of public service broadcasting that was published in the summer is that they at least started to make some nods towards this in terms of putting forward the idea that maybe there is the possibility that YouTube could be regulated. I think they need to go much further than that, and I think yes, YouTube is a big player, but it's also thinking about the wider platform ecosystem within which broadcasting is now operating now that it is increasingly online. And I think that we need to be the issue with it is that it's very complicated. It's very complicated to define what the market is, and it's really hard to work out what regulations might work and what would be the unintended consequences. And what worries me is if we don't have those conversations, then we don't get to good solutions. And so that's why I think we need to be having those conversations now.
Is this something that everybody should be responding to the Ofcom consultation, or is that slightly different area, do you think? Well, we can talk about it afterwards, but I think
Yeah, I mean,
Because
as I said, it is there. Thank you very much. All these things you're talking about, I mean, and Catherine, your probably more familiar than most on the panel are things that we've been talking about and looking at for years. I mean, it is possibly one of the most complicated areas when you start talking about prominence on social media, and YouTube is that sort of first step. And as we know, all the broadcasters, all the PSBs joined together with that call for prominence on social media. Very hard to find someone who can actually define what that is and how it will work, but there is an awful lot going on behind the scenes in terms of that prominence. But yes, please do. Ofcom website is where you'll find
I'm going to ask one final question, which we've mentioned YouTube, but it doesn't get a lot of discussion. How important is it, and how are the existing broadcasters now using YouTube? Because I know a lot of them are using it in different ways. Who wants to talk about YouTube?
I'll take it first. Do you want to say
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting that the series that we make for ITV, which is True Crime series, it got kind of, unfortunately, just under 1 million, you know, when it went out on ITV. The same kind of few days, it got 2 million on YouTube. So it, you know, it kind of really helps kind of, and it's so important. But unfortunately, the ad revenue on YouTube isn't comparable. So that's why companies like ITV and all the other PSBs, they need to have these models where they're across as much digital as they can.
So what is the YouTube model for you? You put it up there. Who owns it? Who gets the revenue?
Well, while I'm in license to ITV for making that programme, and actually ITV distribution is selling it as well, then they're kind of, you know, they've got it for the time being. But once my deal with ITV distribution goes in 7 years, it'll go on our YouTube channel, which is called A True Story. So that's got its own kind of life on YouTube.
I mean, in terms of the UK public service broadcasters, Channel 4 was really the driver or the leader in this because it has to reach a younger audience, so it's much more mission critical for it. And they struck a deal with YouTube to sell their own advertising. So by selling their own advertising, the ad return is percentage is the same, but because they're selling their own, they can sell it for a lot more, and then they can get a better financial return. So that's helped the financial piece, and my understanding is that ITV are doing something similar. And so that helps the financial piece, but there is still a whole set of other challenges with putting your stuff on YouTube. So you have no control over its visibility. So you can try and make content that's going to game the algorithm in some way so that you're going to get more visible, but then you've got public service content and production decisions and distribution decisions being determined by the algorithms of large global tech companies rather than public service media value. So there's a real potential for a value conflict there. Content can suddenly disappear. We know from conversations with Channel 4...
When you say disappear completely or just not very
visible?
visible?
Not be visible, just not be visible. We will all be banned. So Channel 4 content, news content that was that within broadcast code for going out at 7 o'clock has been blocked from going out on some of the social media platforms in the past for not meeting their content moderation standards. By the time it's been challenged and then they've reversed it and it's gone on, it's too late, right? It's a few days later. So it's no longer meaningful. So there are a whole set of things that get in the way of public service broadcasters being able to be public service broadcasters in social media sites. And when I talk about this, we've got some of our students here, and I talk about this with younger people, one of the things that they say is, you know, when we hear about this idea of public service broadcasting, we want our media space to have those values. Why doesn't our media space have those values? And so I think there is a really important conversation that we should be having here about how can we take some of the brilliant values of public service media that the older ones of us in this room, which is most of us, that we've grown up with and benefited from, and hand that to the younger generations that are coming up so that in the media spaces that they occupy as well, they get the same benefits.
Thank you. And Gill, finally, I mean, where is YouTube going? It can only get bigger, do you think?
YouTube can only get bigger. I mean, I think Cathy said most of this here, but I mean, if you're on there, they all have to be on there, but they are subject to whatever the algorithms that YouTube, say, and Google suddenly change, and then you could sort of lose your availability whatsoever. But if you think about But all the broadcasters are also doing a lot on news in the social media space to try and combat all the disinformation that people get on that social media. And it's a really important thing that they're doing there. And they're fighting just so they can actually get sort of proper journalism out to everyone, because the younger people will not watch news at 10.
Yeah.
You heard it here first. Younger people will not. Anyway, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful panel. Thank you very much. Torin, yeah.